In 1938, a 9-year-old boy named Milton Serrata suggested Google for the name of a big number that his mathematician uncle, Edward Kasner, came up with. A googol is the digit 1 followed by 100 zeros. The next biggest number up is called a googolplex, which is 10 to the power of Google. A googolplex has so many zeros that there's not enough space in the entire observable universe just to write the number down. Even if you could write each zero on a single atom, that's a big number. And of course, there's even a bigger number than a googolplex. It's called Graham's number. What the number 10 is to a googolplex is to Graham's number. We don't know how many digits there are in Graham's number. Not even Ronald Graham himself knows how many digits there are in the number. He does know the last 7 or 8 numbers and that it ends with a 7. Graham's number is so big, so colossal, that it in itself becomes a mystery. When the BBC documentary that we just saw a clip from was showing Ronald Graham doing his proof for Graham's number, they were running celestial music in the background as a soundtrack. After he's done his proof, he then humbly admits that Graham's number is not really any closer to infinity than the number 1. As Christians, we worship an infinite God. Great is our Lord and mighty in power, writes the psalmist. His understanding has no limit. That last word means something to mathematicians. The heavens, even highest heaven, cannot contain you. As Christians, we worship an infinite God. And the language of mathematics, I've learned this week, can teach us more about who our infinite God is. Can help us, if we're willing to wield it and imagine what it could be, to know Him more. Galileo summarized it this way. 1. God has written the book of nature in the language of mathematics, he writes. 2. Man can learn this language. 3. Man can apply it to the study of nature due to its logical structure. 4. Handled with care, this language cannot err or go astray. And then finally, 5. This language is not only the most certain epistemological way of knowing tool, but in fact is the most perfect one, capable of elevating the mind to divine knowledge. Math is the perfect tool and language with which to engage the logical, reasoned, mathematical mind of God, the God who made all things. It is logical. It is very precise language. It's provable in a lot of cases, at least at an elementary level. It's an objective language that doesn't get caught up in our subjectivities. The proof either works and is peer-reviewed or it doesn't work. Math's rules are clear and trustworthy. The language of math is universal, and in many senses, it's limitless. Where physicists can go only so far, mathematicians can imagine even beyond that with their math. They're not fixed or somehow limited by material realities. And for those who are most fluent in math, and you watch that documentary or talk to a mathematician, math is beautiful and elegant and awe-inspiring. Cue the celestial music. Mathematician Keith Devlin evocatively describes the mathematical process as, quote, making the invisible visible. Romans 1 declares, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood by what has been made, so that people are without excuse. mathematician Ian Stewart says, "We encounter mathematics everywhere, every day, but we hardly ever know it." He's speaking to us everywhere, every day through math, and we hardly ever know it. And that kind of got me this week, because I thought, here you are, talking about God who's speaking everywhere, and hadn't even thought about engaging God in the sphere of math through this chapter and language that God is speaking everywhere. Maybe more everywhere than anything we've ever looked at before. As Christians, we worship an infinite God. On January 22nd, 1886, George Cantor, who had discovered the existence of an infinite number of infinities, wrote a letter to Cardinal Johannes Franzen, not the Detroit Red Wings player, of the Vatican Council, defending his ideas against a possible charge of blasphemy. A devout believer, the mathematician considered himself a friend of the church. God, he believed, had used his preoccupation with numbers to reveal a further aspect of his infinite nature. Last week, I met with two math enthusiasts from New Hope, Andrew and Zaak. And when we started off the conversation, both of them immediately thought, this is where you got to go with this sermon. You got to talk about this idea of infinity. And so Andrew jumped in and said, there are different types of infinity. I can say there is more infinity here than there is there. There are infinities that are countable and others that are uncountable. And then he went on and on to talk about all these different kinds of infinities. And I'm kind of already feeling the pain come to the front of my forehead. And then Zaak jumped in and he said, trying to explain it and seeing my stress, he said, there are as many rational numbers between 0 and 1 as there are greater than 1. He went on to explain that. But then I saw the explanation again in this book written by Daniel Tammet called Thinking in Numbers. And he tells it in a story, which I think is a little more graspable for us. A couple of pages. As many numbers between 0 and 1 as there are rational numbers beyond 1. A young boy is on a walk home from school and writes, "It was mid-afternoon, but the electric lights were already shining. Fluorescent halos stood out in the darkening sky at equidistant points. I counted the time it took me to step with even paces from one lamp post to another." Who has not done that? Right. 8 seconds. And then I retreated, counting backward, and arrived at the same result. A few doors down, the lights came on in my parents' house. Yellow rectangles glowed dimly between the red bricks. I watched them with only half a mind. I was contemplating those 8 seconds. To reach the next lamppost, I had only to take so many steps, and before I reached there, I would first have to arrive at the midway point. That would take me 4 seconds. But this observation implied that the remaining 4 seconds also contained a midway point. 6 seconds from the start, I would land upon it. 2 seconds would now separate me from my destination, yet before I made it, yet another halfway point, a second later, would intervene. And here I felt my brain seethe hot under my woolen hat. For after 7 seconds, definitely a mathematician, eh? After 7 seconds, the 8th and final second would likewise contain a halfway point of its own. 7 1/2 seconds after starting off. The remaining half second would also not elapse before I passed its midway point in turn. And after 7 seconds and 3/4, a stubborn quarter of a second of my journey would still await me. Going halfway through it would leave me another 1/8 of a second to go. 1/16 of a second would keep me from my lamppost. Then a 32nd of a second, a 64th, and then 1/128, and so on and so on. Fractions of fractions of fractions of a second would always distance me from the end. Suddenly, I could no longer depend on those 8 seconds to deliver me to my destination. Worse, I could no longer be sure that they would let me move 1 inch. Those same interminable fractions of seconds that I had observed toward the end of my journey applied equally to the start. Say my opening step took 1 second. This second, of course, contained a halfway point, and before I could cross this half of a second, I would have to transverse its own midway point, the initial quarter second, and so on. And yet my legs disposed of all these fractions of seconds as they had always done. Adjusting the heavy school bag on my back, I walked the length between the lampposts and counted once again, to 8. The word rang out defiantly in the cold, crisp air. The silence that followed, however, was short-lived. "What are you doing, standing out in the cold and dark?" shouted my father from the yellow oblong of the open door. "Come inside now." I did not forget the infinity of fractions that lurked between lampposts on my street. Day after day, I found myself slowing involuntarily to a crawl as I passed by them, afraid perhaps of falling between the whole seconds into their interspersed gaps. What a sight I must have made, inching warily forward, tiny step after tiny step, with my round woolly head and the lumpy bag upon my back. Numbers within numbers, and so tiny. I was amazed. Infinitely small numbers going on forever. Infinitely large numbers, far greater than what our universe can hold. Infinity times 2, infinite dimensions within which infinity can play out. Infinity times infinity, infinity to the power of infinity. It's like there's no end to the study of infinity. An infinite number of infinities, all pointing to an infinite God. Something about how wide and long and deep and high that makes up the nature of infinity. That is awe-inspiring, and it not just to the mathematician. Out of this world, a mystery that draws us. When I was talking with those 2 New Hope math enthusiasts about it, you could tell they felt like they were kind of on the edge of something holy or irreverent. Zaak said, because of the mystery and the confounding nature of infinity, I have to engage it and approach it. He's coming off the edge of the couch at this point. Andrew said, the fact that I don't understand infinity makes me pursue it even more. The mystery of it makes me want to chase after it. You guys are doing the math on this? The Bible talks about the fear of the Lord, a holy, numinous, unapproachable, ever and all things God, before whom character after character in the Bible fall on their faces and lose their words and lose their minds because of who God is. A holy trembling filling them, a fear of God's, a reverence for God's everythingness. Who am I? I put my hand over my mouth. We are made to engage an infinite mystery and tremble before it. I got a sense, even in those mathematicians, and stereotypically, probably not a lot of faith-based mathematicians, right? But it didn't matter. You got a sense they all knew that they were on the edge of something holy, a greater mystery than they could ever comprehend. The infinite, whether they knew it or not. Johannes Kepler thought that when we do math right, we are speaking with one voice with God, the math teacher and the mathematician, and you doing math. We're speaking a language that God speaks, and we are communing with God in stating the truth when we get the truth right, in speaking the language of math about the nature of something that God made. You're communing, communicating, speaking with one voice. And yet, we are no closer to grasping His infinite nature than the number 1 is to infinity.